Hello, friends. Hi. Happy Tuesday evening. It's 8:30 Eastern Time. Good to be with you all. I decided to do a different kind of live tonight. I was talking to a friend who you're going to see here in a minute. I was like, we should just have a conversation about some of this stuff because I think it would be good to talk about online, publicly, in front of people. Why not? So that's what we're going to do. If you're just joining, welcome. My name is Tim. I'm the creator and facilitator of the New Evangelicals. It is great to have you here on the show. That's all I really got. We're a nonprofit organization holding space for folks marginalized by the evangelical church. And we help people navigate a better path forward in their faith. And I've been thinking a lot about this deconstruction thing that a lot of us have found ourselves in over the past, maybe you're brand new to this, maybe it's been a few years. And I was thinking about how much this space has changed. And also I've been asking the question, is there life after deconstruction? I feel like for a lot of people, and I think I've been one of those people for so long, it can kind of feel like an abyss maybe, or like, well, what's left after this process, if it even is a process, is done with me. So today I'm going to talk to someone who really was in this space before even I was. I mean, they're really an OG, honestly, a legend, if you will. And I'm excited to have this person on. So I'm going to bring him in now. Let's see here. Derek, hello.
What up?
It's good to see you, man.
Legend.
I don't know.
Wow, those are big words.
Well, you were in this space before I was, so I see you as a legend.
So I guess that makes me a legend. That's the qualifier there.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
I do. My name's Derek. My partner and I, Rachel, started Your Favorite Heretics back in late summer of 2020. And kind of accidentally stumbled into this space as we were sharing our own personal deconstruction stories from a post that we had shared around church trauma. We ended up recognizing that we struck a nerve with a lot of people in the sense that people were relating to a similar experience that many of us have found ourselves in through deconstruction, is realizing a lot of the harm that we've endured as a result of spending any sort of time within the evangelical church, particularly in America. And what started as really just a space to point people to within our immediate circles, instead of answering every DM, text, and call, we ended up kind of accidentally having a post take off, and have been able to have the immense privilege of meeting so many amazing humans, like the wonderful human next to me, Tim. And so, that's really kind of how I stumbled into this space. Since then, speaking of life after deconstruction, if that's even a thing, Rachel and I have kind of been in sort of like a hiatus, if you will, from officially creating any content. But my heart's absolutely still devoted to this experience, and I really find that this is such an important community, and I'm grateful for it. So,
well, there's another friend that's here, Brian, says two of my favorite boys, and we both know Brian. So hello, Brian. It's good to see you. If you're still here, I mean, let's face it, the social media world, it's like you pop in, you pop out. So I've met a lot of cool people in this space as well, which is awesome. It is interesting because I started TNE in December of 2020. December 1st was when I just kind of launched the Instagram account. When did you start Your Favorite Heretics?
So I think it was June 2020. So
okay. Yeah, so I found the world of whatever we're calling this deconstruction, and you and your partner's account was one of the just like legendary ones. And it was interesting because I first ran into you guys. I'm like, oh, they're saying some pretty interesting things. Like, this is pretty provocative. Oh yeah, I definitely see this. And then as I started hearing more and more stories from people, your posts made more and more sense to me. For you personally, you don't have to give us your life story, but what were some of the ingredients that led up to you getting so to the tipping point with things that you started that account to express your frustration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like many of our stories, it's full of various streams that have flown, in all sorts of directions.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the big moments that I refer to often, so for any of you who have heard my story, you might have heard this before, but when I became a dad, I remember my oldest was less than one. He was playing around, and I remember looking at him and just having a thought. There's nothing that he could do that would ever make me want to cause him any harm, let alone an eternity of harm. So either I'm more loving than God, or my idea of what God is, who God is, needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think that question was really the beginning of my unraveling. But I wasn't ready to embrace that thought in its entirety. I had to shelve it. But as many of us have experienced, the pain of cognitive dissonance can only last so long before, you just are like, I can't ignore this any longer, kind of thing. So that was really the beginning for me. And I started, gravitating toward alternative theologies around, atonement theories and, rethinking my understanding of what hell is and, where we arrived at the idea of eternal conscious torment, and a lot of things that brought immense freedom and, a sense of relief, that I don't have to live with this strange paradox that I believe that God is loving and also in the same breath could be so dark and disturbing of wanting to torture humans for eternity in flames. I couldn't reconcile that idea. And I think it requires a lot of mental gymnastics to support theology along those lines that's retributive in nature and violent in nature. So that was really the beginning of my curiosity that sent me down the path that, I couldn't keep quiet about it after long. So
Yeah, for sure. I think your curiosity, maybe it's safe to say you were in sync with a lot of other people's curiosity, kind of coming to the same
Backstreet
conclusions.
Boys with a lot of people.
Yes, no, fair. Well, we all know that NSYNC is superior for a lot of reasons, but yes, we can say Backstreet Boys too. It feels like there was this wave of people kind of maybe who have been thinking about some of those things for a long time, but finally got to a point where they said, I really can't ignore that, or the answers I was given by my faith tradition are just completely insufficient. And I will agree with you, Derek. Having kids, I mean, the idea that my kid is totally rotten and wicked and depraved just is absurd to me, or that me as a father would wish harm on my kids so I would get glory is crazy. Now, I know a lot of people who are still in my ear and my head would say, well, you just don't understand God and God's ways aren't our ways, yada, yada, yada. But like you said, to your point, Derek, I don't think I'm more loving and inclusive than the being or the thing that spoke the universe into existence and that spawned all of humanity, right? If anything's more inclusive, or if anything's inclusive, it's that, not me with just my one family. But when you guys launched, you really took off. You guys grew very quickly and your stuff was getting shared around. How was that for you? Was that kind of like a surreal thing to have your content and posts just shared so widely and so many people resonating with it?
Yeah, especially because it was just so unexpected.
Yeah.
But really, I think what it did for me was reaffirm how important this conversation is. So less about our stuff and more about the greater phenomenon that's going on, because I'm sure you experienced and many others who are listening, you go through this period of feeling so disoriented that your worldview is being pulled apart, and you're terrified of these questions because of, the narrative we've been fed that, that's kind of off limits.
Right.
And the slippery slope that it would take us down. But beyond that, it's the high stakes sort of situation that's at hand as well, with the potential of losing community, the potential of feeling moving from certainty to uncertainty, right? I'm sorry,
Yes.
my Italian greyhound has the zoomies and he's running around and just like you hear his nails on the
Oh,
hardwood.
no worries. It's fine.
So he's like, why aren't you playing with me right now? Um, but anyway, so I I think what that showed me was that this conversation um, wasn't just a unique experience that because honestly, and this may sound silly, and again, maybe some of you who are listening experience the same thing. I felt like I was crazy, like I was the only one who was going through this. And then I
Yeah.
remember um, a mutual friend of ours, Chris, had invited me to a Facebook group, and I realized, oh my God, I'm not the only person who's asking these questions
Right.
and is rethinking their faith and examining their theology and all of these things. And so that like terrifying sense of like being the heretic, being burned at the stake, transition to, oh my God, maybe there are friends I can make outside of this very black and white binary community of people that maybe isn't so welcoming and accepting as I once thought.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, you know my story. People know my story. I lost my faith community after I started TNE shortly after getting everything off the ground, and it is lonely. And my story was certainly less traumatic than many who I've heard. My pastor shook my hand. My pastor wished me well. Still painful, but again, much less severe than what others have had to go through. And I agree. Like it's kind of interesting. The past, I don't know, maybe a couple of months, I've been kind of reflecting on just the online space that we all kind of found ourselves thrown into, and what it was like then versus what it is like now, I guess, and just how so many of us have changed dramatically in the past 3 years. I mean, I'm certainly not the same person I am when I first started TNE. I know, Derek, you have gone through big changes, and a lot of other accounts have as well. Have you thought about that? I mean, you and I talk pretty often. We're buds. We whenever I'm in Georgia, I try and make time to see you, right? We always trying to hang out. So this isn't like, it's not like a typical guest. It's more like talking with a friend. And I'm just like curious for you, man, if you have thought about like the past 3 years as well and just how things have shifted so much and what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that as this has kind of continued to spread, you know, there are so many voices, so many wonderful voices that are contributing to this conversation.
Yeah.
And I think where I was at personally is that like I didn't feel the need to take up the space. Like we wanted to step back and let other people, really let their voices be heard. And beyond that too, like I think that with this whole process, there's times where deconstruction feels very violent and very, and I say that in the sense of like you're aggressively tearing down these ideas and these
Yeah.
beliefs. And one second, I'm going to correct my dog because he's making a lot of noise. One
Okay.
second.
Go ahead. Do your thing.
Okay, real life. So
Yes, it is
anyway,
real life.
I I think it reached a point where it was like there has to be periods of rest. I mean,
Yeah.
it's this idea I've likened deconstruction often to breathing. Like there's a lot of the inhaling and the exhaling, right? We're taking in the good and discarding the bad. And sometimes like it could reach a point where that rate of breathing goes so fast where you're like, oh my gosh, I need to like rest a little bit. I need
Yeah.
to let my heart rate slow down. And I think that was kind of how I was personally feeling with just at least from the content side of things. Um, but beyond that, that whole aspect aside, I think it's so important for us to like be patient with the process and recognize that we don't always have to be aggressively or actively like learning something new, right? I think we
Mm.
grew up in a culture where how's your walk with the Lord going, like what
Yeah.
devotional are you reading, and like it becomes this scrupulous digestive process to where you feel as if you're stagnant if you're not doing right. So I
Yeah.
think that a lot of healing and in the deconstruction process comes from just like allowing ourselves to naturally become and like naturally be, and discovering what it means to truly be who we are.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's been like one of the most freeing and best aspects of all this, and could easily be weaponized from people from the outside looking in. But truly, the liberation that deconstruction has brought is that we have absolute permission to love ourselves. And I
Mm.
wore this shirt kind of on purpose. But it's true. Like we were taught to, that it was holier to hate ourselves than it was to actually love ourselves completely.
Yeah.
And what a fucked up thought
Mm.
that, we're supposed to deny ourselves to our own detriment, when in fact, like putting the oxygen mask on ourselves, right, is the best way that we could be, our best selves for the service of others as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to keep ranting, but what are your
No, you're
thoughts about some
good.
of that?
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, I even this term deconstruction, it's so slippery, right? And for a long time, I found myself in conversations where people were like, "This is a movement," and it's like, maybe, And
Oh God.
listen, I understand the natural tendency to want to label things as soon as you can to try and show that, hey, like we can be a force to be reckoned with as well. I think I totally get that 100%. But usually like a movement has a direction that it's going in, and people who deconstruct go in all different directions. That's why I
Mhm.
really call it an explosion. People are just launched maybe from like a large center point of like, hey, my religion. My religious background screwed me up big time. Whether it's Mormonism, there's people in the LDS space who have deconstructed, or fundamentalism in the evangelical flavor, or Catholicism, whatever. But a lot of times they go in very different directions. I mean, Joe Lumen, right, a friend of ours who we know through this space, started off as like more progressive Christian, and then now I think it's just not doesn't identify as Christian at all. It's like she just deconverted, And many people as well that I can think of, other accounts that were hot on the scene when they first started, also made a decision at some point. They were like, hey, I did it, like now that I'm kind of free of my fundamentalism, I've decided that, yeah, spirituality is important to me, but not important enough to make content for all the time. So I'm going to go back into the workforce and like just kind of pursue like my dream job of whatever it is. And so it's been just so fascinating to watch how that wave has crashed upon different rocks and kind of just dispersed people all over the place based on what they wanted to get out of that experience. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, I think again, it's giving ourselves permission to really figure out what we think and what we truly want out of life.
Yeah.
And I think for so long, we were comfortable with being gaslit from the pulpit, or gaslighting ourselves to an extent, because again, we were force fed these ideas that our heart is deceitful and wicked, and we can't lean on our own understanding, and so we're just primed for just questioning everything about ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for having a very fragmented identity.
Yeah.
And so when all of this is pulled apart, it's finally coming back to like, wait, who am I? Like, what
Right.
do I really want and believe? And what do I want
Right.
out of life? And I think that, you know, allowing for that to be a process, the term that I've really latched onto, I would say over the last year or so, is spiritual fluidity.
Mm.
And allowing curiosity to be the guiding principle in which have been navigating, deconstruction from where I am. And why I like spiritual fluidity is that I think that it is a helpful framework to at least make sense of how our beliefs are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And we're constantly changing. I mean, that's the
Right.
one constant of life, is that, you know, things change, we change. And I think the challenges with a very black and white and dualistic way of looking at the world that many of us were, experienced within, like evangelicalism, for example,
Yeah.
leaving that behind, it, again, it requires a lot of almost like building new muscles,
Mm.
building, and discovering new sides of who we truly are. And
Yeah.
that can feel scary, but it can also feel incredibly invigorating and exciting and absolutely like a huge breath of fresh air, like you've been stuck underwater and you can finally breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Valorai said, yes, the move from certainty to uncertainty was definitely a terrifying process. And yeah, I mean, it was for me, and I'm sure, like you, Derek, and maybe Mr. Ballery's as well. The farther you go down, though, like that rabbit hole, the more freeing it really becomes, right? And so there is like kind of this hump that you kind of get over of I'm terrified, I don't want to do this is uncomfortable, but I have to keep going. Like something in me says you can't stop. And then once you get over that hump, it's like, oh, now that I've rewired enough of my brain to not be panicking all the time, it's actually quite freeing to not worry about, burning in hell for all of eternity or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one of the question I framed this conversation online as is there life after deconstruction kind of vibe, right? Like, okay, what's after this process? And first off, I don't think deconstruction personally is necessarily just a process. I do think it's kind of a way of thinking about things kind of going forward. But
I agree.
I believe that there is fullness of life after deconstruction in so many ways because it allows you to ungrasp. Oh, I just did a thumbs up. Did you see that on my screen?
I did. That was interesting.
Okay. I don't know how I did that, but cool. Anyway, it allows you to let those really clenched fists start to loosen up a little bit, right? Then eventually you're able to kind of flip your hands over and have a posture, like you said, Derek, of curiosity. Not that you necessarily accept everything as good, beautiful, true, and moral, but it gives you a different way of thinking about things and at least approaching things with curiosity, realizing that, hey, also the world is bigger than me, and things that I might find really compelling, others might not, and vice versa. And certainly we can make room for each other as we navigate the very complicated and in some ways miraculous human experience. The fact that we're on this planet right now at this moment in time and that you and I are talking is like the chances of that are incredibly odd and incredibly low. And so for that to happen is great. And so, like, what do we do with that? And I think deconstruction gives people who grew up in fundamentalism a new way of looking at things that they thought were a binary of this is always right, this is always wrong. This is how this works, this is how this doesn't work. Anyone who's with me is definitely on God's side. Anyone who's against me or who is not with me is automatically on the enemy's side. Like, it kind of tears apart those binaries and makes you realize that, hey, the world's bigger than you. Deal with it.
Right. Exactly. And I think that we were taught that praying the sinner's prayer, we'd be born again.
Yeah.
Right. I really think that in some ways deconstruction is experiencing like being born again, like truly what that's like. And if salvation in its essence is the act of being made whole and healing, then I would say that deconstruction is a really good fulfillment of what salvation looks like and being born again.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Maybe some fundy like Mark Driscoll can get a hold of that quote and do something with it.
Well, Colin says, thank you for not romanticizing deconstruction. It's a very messy and hard journey. Yeah, man. I mean, it is. I mean, Derek, you can probably speak to it as well. It's messy. It's not linear. It is all over the place. You have good days and bad days. But I think overall, at least in my experience, it gets more and more liberating as you go along that path.
Absolutely. And, kind of like I was talking about earlier, I lost friends. I mean, many friends that want nothing to do with me because, well, number one, I probably to some degree threaten their, their comfortable faith and how they operate within evangelical Christianity.
Right.
But number two, they come to conclusions about why I've arrived where I have. And, at a certain point, it's like, do I just want to like conform because I want to like please this particular crowd or, maintain this image that other people have of me? Or do I want to like really step out and experience life, like you said, in its fullness, and not be afraid to let my questions guide me to wherever they want to go.
Right.
And again, that goes back to curiosity for me, in that, I find it really thrilling to come across new questions now instead of terrifying.
Right.
Um, and instead of being skeptical and defensive against people who think differently than I do, I can find wisdom and value in other traditions, um, like Buddhism, or other ways of seeing the world, and and to me, that should be, I mean, if really it all boils down to love,
Right.
um, that should be kind of our posture anyways, wanting to understand and to um, really learn from other people, because there's no way we have the divine figured out.
Right.
And this is not speaking against anybody who may be atheist or want nothing to do with any idea of the divine, but just in my experience, and for those who may be wanting to hold on to some semblance of faith, and figuring out what that looks like, um there's no way that any of us can have the prime real estate, the total idea of God completely figured out. And I think many of us can understand why it was so frustrated to be handed this 66 book, uh, text, and said that it's absolutely infallible, absolutely inerrant, and there's no questioning it. And it's like, it's just, the world doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. So it's just funny that, you know, not to ramble here, but to basically sum up what I was saying, it's like, it is much more liberating and enriching to find wisdom and truth in all traditions than to believe that we own and fully understand, who God is. And God, I just wish that that was more of a popular idea especially within Christian spaces.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Like I put it like this, as I'm kind of working this thought out with you in real time, because we're buds and no one's ever going to hear this. But obviously the reason why people maybe identify in a certain religious tradition is because they're compelled that maybe it's the most beautiful for them, at least, right? Or maybe it's the most helpful for them, or maybe they're convinced that like there's the most potential for some kind of like getting to the divine as possible. I think that it's possible to hold a both and approach, where it's like, hey, listen, I absolutely am a Christian. Like, I believe in Jesus. I'm a follower of the way of Jesus. I think that like the ethic of Jesus is one of the best ways to live life. And I think that there's something maybe even unique, I would say, about that with God. I also recognize, though, that my Muslim and my Buddhist and my Hindu, etc. friends have also strongly held beliefs, and there's no reason why I can't at least learn more about why they believe and what they believe, and at least be able to say, hey, even if we disagree, I recognize that the world's big, and I recognize that God is meeting people where they're at, whatever religious or cultural moment they find themselves in, right? And so it's like, I think that sometimes people might feel, and I'm not saying you're saying this, Derek, but I feel like sometimes people might think, oh, I can't even acknowledge that, like, I am of this faith tradition, because that might sound like too supremacist or something. It's like, well, no, you can obviously say, I have reasons for why I believe what I believe, but can you also acknowledge that other people out there have also just as strong convictions about their religious tradition, and maybe in ways that we can't understand, the divine is holding all of us throughout these different, methods and ways of being. Obviously, there are always limits to this. There's always moral and ethical questions. We get that. Fundamentalism can exist anywhere. It's not just a Christian problem. I've met fundamentalist atheists who just love to DM me and tell me how dumb I am for believing in anything, that I'm an idiot and I should just burn my Bible. So certainly those people exist. But in our cultural moment, Eric, in America, it tends to be Christian fundamentalists who are doing, I think, the most damage in the society that we live in. And I know other people, Muslim friends of mine, who are very hard on their fundamentalist Islamic, friends, I guess if you can call them that, and say, no, this is a problem. Like what they're doing with Islam is really damaging. So there's people who do that, and that's important. But my lane, your lane, is to call out really what radicalized us and say, no, there's a problem here.
Absolutely. And I think that it goes back to how we relate to one another, and I know for me, a lot of what deconstruction handed me is like being able to see the humanity in others, and like with becoming more inclusive all around, and moving from a non-affirming faith to affirming, and so many other things included within that. But I remember like when I finally came to terms, for example, with being affirming of the LGBTQ community, like I was like, I was so happy that like I could reckon with that, because it felt like a relief that I can love people that I wanted to love. But like, it was a process of me working out a lot of the shitty theology I was handed, that like somehow the Bible instructs us not to accept and love these people.
Right.
And so again, going back to what you were saying, like, if beliefs are hindering us from being able to love ourselves and love the other people, then I think that our beliefs should be questioned. You know what I mean? And not love like how evangelicals tend to twist it as like, well, it's speaking the truth in love by telling you you're going to burn in hell forever if you don't, agree to these tenets.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I think you're pretty much just like calling being an asshole loving to justify being an asshole.
Yeah.
Love is innate. And I think that's one universal truth that we can always go back to. It's that there's something within all of us that understands what it's like to experience love. And that to me is experiencing the divine. So yeah.
So where are you now with some of this stuff? Would you still say, hey, I'm somewhere in that Christian house? Maybe I'm in the attic. I don't know. Or are you like,
big house with lots and lots of rooms. No, sorry.
Exactly. Just like that. Or are you more like, meh? I mean, depends on the day. I'm spiritually fluid. I mean, where do you put yourself in this camp?
It's
right now?
kind of the latter, but also this is another way I explain it. Christianity will always be my native spiritual language.
Yeah. Amen to that.
And there's nothing that I can do to change that. Like that's the language that I was given to speak about the divine.
Right.
Can I learn other ways of speaking about the divine? Sure. And on top of that, I find a lot of beauty and truth and deep connection in a very I guess a ethereal or spiritual way to Christ, and has my understanding of who Jesus is like changed 100%.
Yeah.
But I say all that because, as many of us know, when you align with the label Christian, that comes with a lot of baggage and a lot of assumptions. So yeah, I mean, I don't really care for the label, but it's not super pithy to just throw that out, at like having a drink with somebody and like just being like, all right, how long do you have? Let me like,
right. Yeah. I mean, it comes with so many, understandable assumptions, right? Like in the American context, you say Christian, people are not going to think like mainline, Episcopal, they're going to think, oh, so you voted for Trump. So like you think that groomers are taking over the schools, like critical race theory is a problem. You probably hate woke people, something like that. I mean, they're gonna assume that you're somewhere on the spectrum of like conservative to far right, and that your politics reflect that as well. And so you're right. It's like, do I really want to say I'm a Christian, but wait, before you assume all these things, like let me spend the next hour explaining to you that my whole life story. Yeah, I mean, I get that. Like, it makes complete sense. And by the way, friends out there listening to this is not like a new problem. Even back in my evangelical days, there's a book by the Barna Group called Unchristian, and they talk about like how in 2006 Christians have had this perception by the general public that they were too hypocritical, too judgmental, too homophobic, too political. So like this is not like a new phenomena, even though we're talking about it now. This is part of like the evangelical dilemma that has really happened since the moral majority kind of radicalized the movement and baptized it into far right politics. But yeah, it's a problem. So I'm with you on that, man. Like, no, I'm good. Like, I'm somewhere like in the Jesus tradition. Is that a better word? I don't know, but I know Christian ain't it right now.
Yeah, that checks out. So Tim, unpack that for us. I'm going to interview you now. What does that look like for you these days?
What? Unpack what?
What you just said about, well, at least where you're at right now with your deconstruction process, and
Oh, yeah.
you know how you would consider yourself like within Christianity and the Jesus tradition, as you
Wow,
just
you're really
said.
flipping the tables on me. Isn't this my
Boom.
job, Derek? I'm
Boom.
gonna text you after this. How dare you?
How dare you?
How dare
Who do
you?
you think you are?
Yeah, I mean, the best way I sum it up is that I'm still committed to Jesus. I still have allegiance to Jesus. My faith tradition radicalized me when I was younger. Those pathways are built in my head. Those neurons they're connected. I can't shake the Jesus thing. I can't shake the fascination I have with the Christian tradition. I fully acknowledge that I'm not everyone. So I know that my take and experience might not be, I know, this is a crazy thought, but my experience and belief in the Christian tradition might not be for everyone. I know that's wild. I know.
There's
yeah.
only objective truth, brother.
Good.
So,
I mean, yeah, really. I think the way I put it is that everything I do, I want to come out of my, I like the word allegiance over faith, and I draw from a book by Michael Bates on this called Gospel Allegiance. And his point in the book is that the word faith is better translated allegiance. It just has a better connotation. It's more accurate for what it meant in in Jesus's day.
Do you pledge allegiance to the Christian flag?
Every morning, brother. But I like that idea because it's like, who has your loyalty? Like, what has your loyalty? And for me, the way of Jesus does. Now, obviously, that's another loaded term. Me and many Christian nationalists would say that we were following Jesus with very different outcomes. So clearly, we have to define that. I like to start with the Sermon on the Mount. I know that's crazy if you just read the words of Jesus plainly at first. I know that's crazy town, but I start there. So yeah, I mean, I have no problem saying I identify as a Christian or as a Jesus person. I think though that like I am more compelled and convinced of like the universal Christ, to kind of quote Richard Rohr here, that there is something that I think
that book is so good. Can we just stop for a second? If y'all haven't read Universal Christ by Richard Rohr, I mean, stop what you're doing right now. Don't listen to this anymore. Go download that.
Well, I have not read it yet, so I will do that.
You need to.
I believe it. I've heard great things. So there is something to that for me of like, I think that this divine thing we're trying to figure out and trying to understand it can speak way beyond the Christian tradition that I've come to know. But for me, I find that the divine speaks loudest, that God speaks loudest through the person of Jesus, through the gospel accounts, et cetera, and through the very long, complicated Christian history. That's just where I'm at.
Can I
fully realizing
can I just say,
it's not everyone's.
That the Christian tradition, I mean, if we're honest, throughout at least the entirety of the biblical text that we have, borrowed from a ton of traditions, whether it was, ancient Near Eastern pagan religions or, obviously borrowing things from within Judaism. I mean, there's just, and then as it's evolved, right? Each context that Christianity has existed within, theology always arises out of a particular context. It doesn't
Definitely.
exist in a vacuum.
Right.
And if you look at church history, you see the different, cultural influences and, other things happening that affected people's understanding and their negotiation with the Bible
Yes.
and with
Dude,
their understanding.
100%.
And there's no way to get around that. So that's why I always think it's silly when you have people who are the Bible clearly says folks, when they're just not recognizing the inherent biases that they are operating within.
Right.
Nobody can approach the Bible with like a perfectly objective, unbiased lens. And,
Well,
and
and
that's the
and
thing
and
is,
how?
yeah,
Oh God. Well, I was
no,
just
go
gonna
ahead.
say, like, and how would you know that what you're reading isn't biased? Meaning, it's not like the Bible that we have. We just dug up all 66 books in Greek and Aramaic, like flawlessly. It's been pieced together from hundreds, if not thousands, of different manuscripts, and then we've had to rely on experts in those languages to make interpretive calls on how to interpret the text. And we have none of the original manuscripts. Like, they just don't exist. Now, for me, none of these things are problematic inherently. Like, oh, therefore it's all bad. I think, for example, and this is just a true statement, that the New Testament is one of the most well-sourced documents in antiquity. That's just it's a reality, right? So I would say, like, I'm confident that what we have is at least some kind of fair representation of what the early manuscripts had. But I also recognize that we could be wrong on that. Like, I recognize that, right? And I also recognize that a lot of people had a lot of hands in making interpretive calls to try and best replicate the text for a Latin audience, or eventually what to German, and then eventually made its way over here to English. So even if I could approach the text completely objective, there's no guarantee that I'm reading an objective text itself, right?
Right.
It's impossible. How would you do that?
You can't. And even translation is interpretation. So even if you're reading the
Yes.
original languages, there's always going to be a measure of subjective input that goes into it. That's why you
Right.
have scholars from all sorts of traditions that are arriving at these different interpretations. But without,
Right.
going down that rabbit trail, the whole thing is that I know for me, going back to the whole deconstruction experience, like, one of the most liberating things is when I stopped making the Bible something that it shouldn't be. And Pete Enns was really influential for me in the
Yes.
Bible for Normal
Yes.
People. His book, The Bible Tells Me So,
Great
was
book.
hugely instrumental. Another recommendation for anybody who's looking for a solid book on that. But a lot of Pete's thoughts around, you know, one of his famous quotes of, the Bible really is like God letting his kids tell the story.
Right.
And the more I understand the humanity in these 66 books written across thousands of years and, from very particular ancient contexts that are very different than ours, so many different genres, so many different understandings and relations to the divine. Like, we are so far removed from that we don't even begin to understand that, like, it's night and day.
A hundred
Um,
percent.
and
A
yet we
hundred
have these
percent.
nice and neat, like, 5-point sermons being delivered from these mega churches as if they've, like, just, you know, directly received this transmission from God, that, like, their perfect interpretation and um their hermeneutics are just, like, impeccable, right? But my point is the more you humanize the text, the more you recognize that so many people in the Bible were still trying to figure out who the hell God is. Like,
Right.
nobody's got it figured out.
Yep.
That's the thing.
Yep.
And that should be it. Is that, there's conflict within the entirety of the text from beginning to end. But that's the point, is that we're invited into that experience of working out what it even means to be human and what it even means to understand the divine.
Right.
And it's less to me of approaching this text and tradition of, here's all the things that you need to believe, but here's a spectrum of what people have believed, and this is an experience you get to enter into. So
Yes.
for me, it's, really humanizing the text has brought a lot of life to it for me, post, evangelicalism. And I, it allows for me to be able to approach it not with fear. Like, I had a lot of times
Right.
of like, oh, what am I going to read that like the Holy Spirit's going to convict me of and make me walk away feeling like shit or whatever.
Right.
Um, when in reality, it's like, wow, look at how clearly they missed the mark that God would want to dash babies against rocks and just like completely pillage cities and,
Right.
call for genocide. Like, do we really believe that like if we have this idea that God is love, or that we want to have this understanding of the divine to be something that's ultimately beneficial and causes human flourishing, like do we really believe that that's like a healthy and accurate view of the
Right.
ultimate? um I don't think so. And I'm
Yeah.
like, give ourselves permission to be honest and to
Yeah.
disagree with the Bible, because like everybody does, whether they're honest with it or not.
Well, I like to think about us being in conversation with the tradition, right? Or with at least one stream of the tradition. The tradition is way bigger than any one human. But when you switch your mind from this static, ironclad, set of like moral objective truths that have always existed to actually this has ebbed and flowed, and this has been there's been give and take, and there has been a lot of conversation, a lot of disagreement, and Martin Luther calls men who use birth control worse than people who commit incest, and now no one thinks that today, for example, right? Like the point is that it really is a fluid conversation that is still being written, as opposed to here's the like objective reality of everything. Now, of course, I would argue that maybe the Christian tradition has some like pretty ancient and pretty like withstanding at least beliefs. I mean, I think that like a physical resurrection is mostly widespread and held throughout most Christians throughout all time in history. Of course, there's always exceptions. John Dominic Crossan is one of the greatest New Testament living New Testament scholars today. He would not affirm that, so I don't know what you do with that. But like my point is that 9.9 out of 10 people would. But like after that, it gets pretty funky. I mean, even the Trinity was a concept that was developed over time. And by the way, that shouldn't shock anyone, even conservative evangelicals and apologists that admit, yes, this is part of the reality. So I just think ultimately, Derek, as I start kind of landing this plane, I guess, I have found that the belief I inherited that essentially told me these are objective, static facts of the universe, as objective and static as gravity is to us right now. That just didn't hold up once I did what they told me, which was take my faith seriously, take the Bible seriously. Don't take their word for it. Look into it myself, or find other voices to give other opinions. And it turns out when you start talking to people who have spent their whole life devoted to understanding the Bible, they go, based on what we know, it's not really what you think, and we're in conversation with it, and so have Christians for thousands of years. And by the way, other Christian traditions even have slightly different Bibles. So there's that part to reckon with too, right? So I just think once you start putting those pieces together, the concept of an inerrant Bible, or, hey, just believe A, B, C, D, and E and you're good, become untenable in light of the reality that the Christian tradition is way bigger than some white people in America in the 21st century.
Exactly. I mean, that's yeah, spot on. And I think, to go back to the original question that you had posed for our conversation, is there life after deconstruction?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think it's important to center the fact that, like, what do you want your life to look like?
Right.
And like, instead of having, a church community or a pastor or idea of like what we think God is mandating our lives to look like, what's true in your heart of hearts? Like, that to me is the divine speaking and like tugging on you to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's the most like spiritual experience that we can have, is like to truly be honest with what we want out of life for ourselves, and that would cause us to be the truest to who we are. And
Yeah.
That to me, it brings the most profound liberation.
Yeah.
and I think that should be something that continues to guide us. We were so taught again to ignore our desires and to forsake ourselves, that I think that again through deconstruction, it's like that is life, is like really
Right.
really paying attention, like who we are,
Right.
and that we aren't wicked, and that we aren't broken, and that we aren't, you know um all these things that we were fed, that were negative views of ourselves, but really reclaiming the beauty of our being.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know the the not so neat and sexy answer to that is, it's whatever you want it to be. Like,
Mm.
life, is there life after deconstruction? Yes, whatever you want it to look like.
Yeah.
I think you should share what Kevin said, though, because I think it's pretty brilliant as well. If you
What
want.
about the death thing?
Yeah, yeah.
What did Kevin say? Hold on, I'm scrolling through right now.
So for those of you
he
who
just
are
said no
wondering who
life,
we're referring
only
to, yeah.
death.
Yes. So our dear friend Kevin Garcia,
Love Kevin.
we were talking, in a little group chat that we have, and they said, "No life, just death," in typical Kevin fashion.
Yeah, I
And
was
if
just
you know
gonna say
Kevin,
that.
but it's true too. I mean, a lot of it is a dying to ways that we thought our lives would turn out, and there's some
Yeah.
measure of grief, and I think it's okay to recognize the messiness and the pain in it, and the death of old communities and relationships, the
Yeah.
death of who we thought God was,
Yeah.
and all these things. Like, so there really is a death, and
Yeah.
I think that in embracing that, it gives way to new life,
Yeah.
because we can't avoid the reality that some things do need to die.
Yeah. I love that. Derek, this was a real fun conversation. It was great catching up with you and talking about deconstruction and life after deconstruction and all that, and all of what that entails. Are you do you have social medias? Like, do you post stuff anywhere right now? Are you active?
Tim, you should know that.
I'm
Unbelievable.
setting
No,
you
I'm just
up,
kidding.
Derek. Come on.
It's a
dude,
joke, guys. We're friends.
Plug your stuff away. Come on.
So yeah, I mean, so for those of you who are just tuning in now, Rachel, my partner, and I, we started Your Favorite Heretics on Instagram back in 2020. We still have a backlog of content and stuff that
Yeah,
I think
it's great.
I would love for anybody who hasn't checked out our stuff to take a look at it. But personally, yeah, I'm at Derek the Heretic, on TikTok, on Twitter. I refuse to call it the letter of the alphabet. And yeah, just kind of trying to figure things out. Maybe on Threads, if that ends up taking off. I want it to, but who knows?
I love that. Well, Derek, it was great talking to you. Of course, I'll talk to you probably tomorrow, but thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
See ya. All right, friends, there you go. My conversation with Derek, it was awesome. I've been thinking about the deconstruction space so much recently and just how it's changed. And there are a lot of accounts that don't post anymore. Again, not for any bad reason. They just moved on. So it's been fascinating to see how that's played out. And it was great talking to Derek, who was one of the first accounts I ever encountered in that deconstruction explosion on social media. So anyway, friends, hey, thanks for being here. It means the world. If you like our work, feel free to share this episode or subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are also a nonprofit, and donations donations are what make, I think that's the right way, are what make this work possible and make it all completely paywall free. No Patreons, nothing at all. So we just do this work and give away everything because people are generous, and that's what makes it possible. So thanks again for hanging out. We will talk next time. Actually, we're talking this Thursday. I'm responding to a Mark Driscoll and Russell Johnson interview with scholar Kevin Carnahan back here on YouTube live at 8 o'clock Eastern. I'll see you then. Deuces. Gotta find that finish button. There it is.